This tool corresponds with the arrow we see on the screen, and it just gives us the option to select by placing it over objects. If you had another tool selected, for example the pen tool, to access the selection tool, you just need to press Escape a few times and you'll be in selection mode. There's no icon to select this tool. It's a default tool that will always be in the program, and just by pressing Escape, we can access it. The first method we see is a simple selection on the canvas. So in selection mode, just place the cursor over any object you want to select and click. Another type of selection is the simple selection in the layer inspector. It's just as easy, just click on the layer that you want to select. The third method is a multiple selection on the canvas. Click on the canvas and create an area. Then all the elements we click on will be selected. Then there's the multiple selection on the layer inspector. Click on the first layer that you want to select. Then, while holding down the caps key, click on the last layer you want to select and see how all the chosen layers are selected. There's the selective selection on the canvas. Say you wanted to select the first and the third elements, but not the second. To do this, select the first element, then, holding down the caps, click on the third. If I wanted the element in the middle, just press caps again and click on this element. To remove elements from the selection, you just need to click on the ones you don't want, again while holding down the caps key. The selective selection in the layer inspector is exactly the same as the previous one, except in this case we'll use Command instead of the caps key to select the layers I want. To deselect, it's the same. Hold down Command and click on the ones you don't want, as easy as that. Finally, there's the area selection. If I press Alt and I create a selection area, you can see that nothing gets selected if I simply place the cursor over it. If I let go of Alt, then the element is selected. By pressing it, this doesn't happen. Until I include the element inside my selection area, it doesn't get selected. So included in this area, the elements on the left and the right which are selected, and the central element isn't, as part of it outside. This is a different way of selecting, but it can be useful sometimes. Now, I'm going to share a little trick to know the distance that exists between different elements. You can do this by pressing the original elements to measure, then pressing and holding Alt, place the cursor over the other elements. You don't need to click. The program will calculate and give you the distances. This is very useful as well as quick and comfortable. We need to go first to this icon on the left and find the drop-down menu for shapes. Here you can create lines, arrows, rectangles, ellipses, etc. Some can be done with shortcuts, or we can access them in the Shape Inspector if we configured it previously. I'll select the Rectangle tool. To make a rectangle, all you need to do is click and extend until you get the size you need, as you can then adjust the height and the width. Let go, and that's our first shape. To select it, remember that you need to click on it. This way you can adjust its dimensions by placing the mouse on the border and clicking and moving the mouse. However, if we place it on the corners, then it will adjust proportionally. But what happens if I want to create a proportional element or I want to modify the center? Look, it's very simple. I'm going to bring out the guides that will help us to understand this exercise. If I take the rectangle tool again, and you see, if I click, I can adjust the height and the width, but it isn't proportionate enough. So for that, just press the caps key to create a proportional shape. I'll repeat this so you can see it properly. So press caps and see how you can create a proportional shape. Let's see now what I have to do so that the center of our shape coincides with the place where I click. Select the rectangle again and see how when you click on the canvas by default, the place where I click is the origin of one of the shape's corners, but not its middle. If I press Alt, now the center of the shape is in the same place where I click, but at the same time, if I want the shape to be proportional, then I can press Alt and the caps key. So I get a proportional shape, and I'm controlling the center of the object. Let's repeat this so it's clear. Press Alt and caps, and there you go. Another option is to move freely around the canvas. Imagine I'm making a shape on the left of the canvas, but then I think it looks better on the right. Just press spacebar and see how the size of the shape is blocked. It doesn't increase or decrease, but I can move it freely around the canvas. Let's see two simple tools that although they are very simple, they have a couple of peculiarities. First, the polygon. When it's first created, it's a pentagon. Don't worry about all the properties in the inspector. We'll see that in more detail later on. But just observe that there's the option for sides. So here we can put how many sides we want our polygon to have. This can go from 3, a triangle, to however many you need, for example 50. We can't really see them that well though. If you double click on it, you're in editing mode, and here you can see all the sides that make up my 50-sided polygon. Let's put 8 sides so we can see it better. This is the star tool. First, let's make a star, and now I have a look in the inspector, and you see the properties for radius and point. The second controls the number of points the star has. And the first, the radius, marks the origin of the points. If I lower it down to 0, then the origin is the center of the circumference that contains the star. And if I put it up to 100, then the origin of the points is right next to the border of the circumference. I've made a shape here, and as you can see, in this first block we have the position, size, rotate and flip. From here, you can control its position, rotate it or flip it vertically or horizontally. But if I select the element on the canvas and move it, the inspector recalculates the position and shows it to me. It's the same if I change the size. It shows me the new dimensions. The next thing I'm going to modify is the border radius, the rounded corners. As I move the handles, they round more or less. This effect is used a lot nowadays, especially for buttons. We also have the opacity that we can adjust to our liking. The blending modes for the layers can be soft light, strong, etc. I'm not really going to go into this as it's more advanced, but I just want you to know that we have a lot of possibilities when we play around with the blending modes. You can create layers and try them out to see what results you get. Then there's the fill or the shape fill, and you'll see we can include more. Imagine I want a solid red color. I could just select it from the drop-down menu and that's it. But if you notice, when you open that drop-down menu, you get the option of applying a solid color, a linear gradient, an angular gradient, a pattern, or even add noise. So let's take a closer look at the linear gradient. On the top you have this, that tells us what the gradient is like. In this case it goes from white to black. If we want to change the colors, just click on the handles and select the color or colors that you want, and there you go. I have a gradient that goes from green to red. On the canvas, you see how I can adjust both the origin of the gradient and the end of it, but also if I place the cursor on the gradient's line, I can adjust it to achieve a more complex gradient. This also happens in other types of gradients like the radial, where I can adjust the shape of the gradient, its center, its length, etc. If you want to remove the anchor points that appear for the gradient, just drag them to the edge and they disappear. The angular gradient is very similar, but it's made along a circumference. We have the option to include a pattern, either a default one or one of our own. For example, I put these lines and select the option to tile this. I can then adjust the quantity or the size of the pattern. Let's leave this layer and we're going to try and recreate the line effect you see on old televisions. Create a blue background to go underneath, but if you notice, the solid blue layer covers the line layer. However, all I need to do is move and reorganize the layers. I'll also change the blending mode to soft light and see how the line effect eases and becomes subtler. It's important to remember that you can use as many fills as you need. The same goes for the edges. At first I have a gray edge and I'll change it to a darker blue and increase the thickness. I can also decide where I want it to be with respect to the edge of the shape, centered, internal, or external. With the fills, I can add more borders, play around with the thickness and position to achieve one result or another. On this wheel, you can play around some more with the settings. You can choose how you want the strokes to be. Do you want rounded corners, flattened, etc.? You can even add arrows to the ends or make a discontinuous line. The next thing we have are the shadows. If you remember, all the values we adjust follow our CSS logic, so any shadows created can be reproduced using this language. I can control the movement on the x-axis, the y-axis, etc. As well as this, I can include more than one shadow. Then we see the internal shadow. I'll make one with the following values and you'll notice that you can't see it. This is because the border is centered. So Choose an external border and then the internal shadow appears. Another characteristic we can modify and include are the filters, Gaussian blur, zoom, etc. This is another element we can play around with and create new effects for our designs. Okay, so now you know more about the Shape Inspector. You can adjust the shape and its position, size, rotation. You can include fills, borders, shadows, and so on. All these characteristics will help us a lot in our designs. To access this tool, click on the icon on the top left or press V on your keyboard. You can also add this tool to your toolbar. When it's selected, see how the cursor changes to a pen. To draw, you just need to click, as you can see, and the line is drawn, creating whatever shape you like. If you block with the caps key, it only allows us to create lines of 45 degrees at a time, so 0 degree, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, and so on. You can also press Alt and see how it changes the anchor point from where we are drawing. This helps to change the place where we draw from easily. Continue with the shape, and when you get back to the start, you see that the cursor has changed and you can close the shape. And now you have an irregular polygon. To modify this, place the cursor on top, and when it turns blue, double-click. Now the anchor points are available to adjust. If you place the cursor on any anchor point, you can move it and place it wherever you like. To create more points on any side of the shape, you get the option to create and then modify anchor points. Again, to create more points on any side of the shape, you get the options to create and then modify anchor points. As you can see, we've created hard points or cornered, as our shape has corners. We'll see another type of points, which are soft or rounded points. Take the vector tool, and to create soft points, just click and drag, and you can see how you're making a curve. To finish the drawing, just press Escape and the stroke is ready to work with. Let's take a closer look at the stroke. If I select a point, you can see it has two handles, one on the right and one on the left. That also is the tangent of the curve, right on the point. To modify it, just move the point or the handles and see how it moves in mirror mode. You can see this in the inspector. Here you have the icon that turns this into a hard point. The icon on the right does the opposite. But if we want to manage these handles asymmetrically, we have this other icon that allows us to move them this way. See how it respects the mirror direction in the handles, but it can work on the entry or exit curve separately. As well as this, there's the disconnected mode, where each handle works independently. This way you have more control of the entry and exit of the curve. To access this, just go to the icon in the top left-hand corner and select it. Press P on your keyboard or select it from the toolbar. This tool is really simple. Click and you can just draw freehand whatever you want. I always recommend using a graphics tablet, as this is how we can get the most out of this tool. We digitalize our stroke with much more precision. If you also have a good pose and you're decent at drawing, then imagine what results you can achieve. Then to transform or edit, just double-click on it to enter editing mode, and it's just the same as the vector tool. You can continue your drawing, move the anchor points or adjust the handles. There isn't much more to this tool. It's as straightforward as using a pencil, and it gives us total control over our stroke. Remember that we can place these tools in the toolbar by right-clicking and dragging them, just as I have done here. The first thing we'll do is create a new shape, and to be able to edit and adjust it, we'll select the Edit tool. Now you can move the anchor points freely or even create new ones and modify them. The next tool is Transform. As you can see, if I place myself in the center of the sides, an arrow appears that indicates left and right, and I can control the inclination of the shape. However, if I place myself in the corners, I get a different effect, in this case, a trapezoid. Let's see the Rotate tool. When I select it, the first thing that stands out is that cross that appears. This is the rotation center, meaning that the rotation we give the shape originates from here. And if I want to move that axis, it's as simple as moving and dragging it to wherever I want to place it. And now you see how the shape rotates around it. The last tool is the Rotate Copies. I'll create a triangle and click on the tool. You get a window that asks us for the number of copies we'd like to make. I'll put 12 and Sketch automatically creates the copies that respect a rotation axis. It distributes the copies around the 360 degrees of the rotation axis. To move or transform the final shape, just grab it and move it wherever you want it to be. You can make all different kinds of rotations. I recommend you practice and play around with this tool. I did this with a triangle, but imagine you want to do it with a different shape, a pentagon for example. I'll repeat the procedure, and as you can see, the results are quite nice as well as professional. First, create a shape. You can find Scale in the toolbar. I have it ready. Just click on it and a window opens. This gives us the option to scale in percentages. At the same time, we can modify the height or the width of the shape, and the program won't readjust the dimensions. And it also lets us choose from which point the scale, center, corners, etc. are applied. For example, I could apply 50% and you see how it scales. I'll put it back to 100% and now modify the width, and again the program recalculates and shows us. Let's modify the origin of the scale and see how it changes from the center, the corners or the sides. This tool is also very simple. There isn't much more to it than what we've seen, so this is enough for now.